Hi, my name's Andy, and our theme this week is calling. So I'm going to talk about Ezekiel's calling, and then your calling, and then I'm going to talk about God's chair. Okay, so first of all, Ezekiel's calling. Jerusalem has fallen, and like the Afghan refugees who arrived in Chelmsford this week, traumatized at the fall of Kabul, he's a long way from the place that he called home. He's not in Jerusalem, he's with the exiles by the river Kibar in modern-day Iraq. Up till now, he's been a priest in the Jerusalem temple, and there's none of that happening any longer. And now God is calling him to be a prophet, but warning him that he's going to be a prophet for people who won't listen. Not easy being a prophet when you get ignored. Just ask Dave and Rebecca, the people who run ordinary office. So God gives Ezekiel a couple of things to help. He gives him a scroll to eat that will make his mouth and his stomach sweet. A sweet stomach? I guess we might say a tender heart. That's what you need when people ignore you or put you down. And along with the tender heart, God promises him, Ezekiel, I'm going to give you a hard forehead and a sweet stomach. We might say the hide of a rhinoceros and the disposition of a Labrador, a soft heart and a tough skin, a heart that melts with love for people, but a skin that deflects criticism and negativity. Let me tell you, you're going to need that, whatever your calling is. Soft heart, hard skin, not vice versa. And that takes us on nicely to our second point, which is your calling, because you've got one just as surely as Ezekiel did. I mean, the church has been a bit rubbish at this. The church has often implied that the really called people are the vicars or the nuns or the missionaries. And they may have stretched it a bit to include nurses, but they've never really come to terms with the fact that everyone has a calling, everyone. In fact, according to my favorite church report ever, we have 3 callings each. Yeah, I have favorite church reports. This one was published last year by the Church of England, and it's called Kingdom Calling. We have 3 callings each: a social calling, a relational calling, a ministerial calling. Your social calling is the way that you work with God and like God for the good of the world. Maybe you tend plants, or you tend people, or you make things. You're a farmer or a preschool assistant or a shirt maker. You're a bit like God the Father. Or maybe you serve people, including people who don't treat you with a great deal of respect. So you're a PA or hospital porter or a bin lorry driver, and that's like Jesus. And maybe you communicate or you help other people communicate. Let me tell you, that is a little bit like the Holy Spirit. Seriously, look at your shadow on the screen and say to yourself, I'm like God. And please don't let anyone tell you that because you're, I don't know, maybe a wheelchair user, or you're homeless, or you're heartbroken, or you don't earn money, that you don't have a social calling. You absolutely do. You make this world better by being in it. You draw out the love and contribute an enormous amount to society, an infinite amount. If you weren't here, there would be a gap no one else could fill. There is a place where your deep gladness and society's deep needs meet. And that is your calling. your vocation. And then there's your relational calling. Maybe as a member of a group of friends or a community of celibate people or a romantic partner or a family or some carers and the person being cared for. But one way or another, we were not meant to be alone. Kingdom calling says that our relational calling is just as important as our social and ministerial callings. And we mustn't neglect it for the sake of them. Again, please don't let anyone tell you that because you're a wheelchair user or you're heartbroken or you're single, and that you therefore don't have a relational calling. No, on the contrary, you are able to love and worthy of love, and that is the meaning of the universe. At the place where your deep gladness and your loved one's needs for love meet, that is your vocation. Tough skin, soft heart. And finally, there is your ministerial calling. All God's people have a ministerial calling. So please don't say that you're a wheelchair user or you're homeless or you're heartbroken or whatever, and therefore you don't have a ministerial calling. You really do. It might be speaking from the front. It might be an encouraging word at the back. It might be making people feel welcome. Maybe your calling is tough-skinned, tender-hearted denouncing of injustice in the church. Maybe it's prayer. Maybe it's sharing what God has done for you on social media. Maybe it's in on-site church, and maybe it's an online church, like an ordinary office. But one way or another, you have a calling. So I've spoken about Ezekiel's calling, and then I spoke about your calling. Can I finish by talking about God's chair, please? You see, in the old days, Ezekiel was in the temple as a priest, and God was in the temple on a throne. There was a wooden box with carved angels on it, and God's throne was above it. Of course, the people knew that God was everywhere, but they felt that he was particularly there, particularly in the temple, above the ark, above the cherubim, settled still on his throne. But Ezekiel chapter 1 says that's all changed. God's throne now has wheels. And I'm sure you heard it in that reading. It's a complex set of interlocking wheels, making it clear that God is not fixed any longer. God is mobile. God will come to you. Ezekiel no longer has to go to a temple building to find his calling, because God has come to Ezekiel on his wheelchair. Yep, that's right. God has a wheelchair. Please do not give me some rubbish that says, oh, that makes God less worthy because God's a wheelchair user. Please don't tell me that Jesus's calling was diminished because he was homeless and heartbroken and single. No, there is a place where God's deep gladness and the world's needs meet. And that is God's vocation. All you and I need to do is discern where God's mobile, wheel-carried calling touches ours and respond accordingly.